Hello and welcome everybody to the fabulous webinar that I'm going to be doing for you today. I am super excited to be here today, and we are going to talk about 3 mindset hacks high achievers need in order to avoid burnout. So a warm welcome to everyone watching, and I'm going to take you through this. So here we go. You know, there's been new research of over 600 US businesses that says that companies with high employment engagement are 21% more profitable. And that's because engaged employees are productive. So when your job is demanding, it's important to be efficient and effective so you can get more done in less time. But all too often, this is easier said than done. And while it might seem like your job demands a lot out of you, your boss is demanding, or even the system in which you work are perhaps the culprit, your mindset might be contributing to the problem more than you realize. Now, I'm talking to you if you are someone who struggles against your own mind. You might lack confidence at work, always feeling like you aren't enough or you don't belong. When faced with adversity, you might have very negative interpretations that lead to anxiety or irritability. Perhaps you notice the ceaseless mind chatter where that inner voice constantly criticizes everything you do. And maybe all this has led you to need to prove yourself. So you focus intently on doing everything perfectly, have a massive fear of making mistakes, and of being humiliated or judged by others around you. Chances are high that you are here because you have tried everything else. You've tried taking time off to get away from work, hoping you can reset on your vacation, only to find out that you're right back to where you left off. You've tried reading all the self-help books to see what you're missing, but found that they make you feel even more disempowered because they focus on things outside of your control. Perhaps you've even gone to therapy to help you get back to yourself, but found that talking about the past isn't getting to the root issue at work. You might have even contemplated changing jobs or switching careers. You've tried it all, and you don't know where else to turn. You spotted this webinar somewhere online, and you thought this would be a last-ditch effort to see if you can save yourself from burning out or giving up on your career if you're already burned out. Now, burnout manifests differently for everyone. So see if you can spot where you are right now as we look at the burnout pyramid. So stage 1 is where engagement is 100%. You feel anxious because you don't believe that you can cope with the pressures and stress of your job. You work harder and harder in an effort to prove yourself while neglecting your personal needs. In prioritizing work over all else, you lose all balance. You're not socializing with friends and family as much, and you dismiss your hobbies. You're aware that something is wrong, but you don't notice the physical symptoms of stress. Your sleep, meals, and social interactions are all erratic. Stage 2 is where engagement is at 75% and you've reached that saturation point. The excess stress is having a serious impact on your mental health. You're taking sick days because you can't bring yourself to keep going sometimes. You feel cynical and blame the demands of your work or the time frame for your problems rather than the changes that have occurred in your life. Stage 3, now engagement is 50%. Your anxiety rapidly spirals out of control and is regularly interfering with your daily life. You're irritable at the people around you and have a hard time relaxing. You become fearful, apathetic, and experience feelings of worthlessness. Stage 4 is where engagement is 25%. You're terrified of having a breakdown, but your anxiety keeps getting perpetually worse to the point of having a panic attack. The sense of emptiness sets in and you become reactive and impulsive. You feel resentful about the impact of your career on your private life, and it may be difficult to find meaning in your work. You look for ways to compensate and fill the void through eating, drinking, or maybe even using drugs. Stage 5 is where engagement is at an all-time low. You're at the end of your rope. You're feeling hopeless and suicidal. You've collapsed mentally and physically. And even if you wanted to now, you cannot keep going. So for everyone watching, before we really go any further, I want you to recognize that if you are at a level 5, then what we're going to be talking about isn't really for you. Because if you're at such a difficult stage, this is very serious and you really need to speak to a mental health specialist who can stabilize your mood. This is also not for you if you're a level 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you really don't want to put in the work to get back on track to living the life that you've always wanted professionally. So who is this really for? It's for those of you who are levels 1 through 4 who are really committed to investing in yourself to bounce back from burnout and salvage your career and its effects on your health. This webinar is for all of you who are committed to creating work-life balance, who desperately want to live your best life, who want to feel accomplished and proud of your work, enjoying time with your family and relaxing outside of work, who want to remove resentment about how work makes you feel, remove any guilt for not doing more at home when you're with your family or not doing enough at work when you're focused on your job. And for those who want to eliminate any fear of losing what you have, including your prestige, security, health, or relationships, because you know deep down that there's a better way and you're hungry for it. So as you can see from the burnout pyramid, once you've passed the optimal range, there's an inverse relationship between engagement and burnout. As your burnout increases, the engagement in your work diminishes. To that end, I'd like to share with you a client story. This is a story of Bobby, the lawyer. And when I met Bobby, he was clearly a type A personality, someone who was competitive, highly driven, and easily wound up. Bobby worked for a very prestigious company in a highly competitive culture. He'd been there for over a decade, and yet every day would feel fearful of losing his job. So he worked constantly and was burning out in the process. Here's a description of his experience as an overly engaged worker in his words. Being in a high demand, high pressure, high stress job isn't for the faint of heart. My current job of 15 years enables me to climb the corporate ladder, get accelerated promotions, consistently be a top performer, and have a salary to go with it. But glitz and glamour couldn't mask the daily and sometimes hourly struggles of burnout. When Dr. Sharon challenged me to take a break, take a step back, and do things for myself, I was fearful of the repercussions. I thought that my team would see that I wasn't around and think I was disengaged. I wouldn't be at their beck and call. I would be passed over for the next role. This was a detriment to my own balance. With Dr. Sharon's guidance, I took the fear head on and tested my hypothesis of taking a break and taking time for myself in the middle of the day. It was a foreign concept that I could take time away from work. And for the first time in my career, I took 15 minutes to enjoy my kids and play Frisbee with them in the backyard. When I returned to my desk, I was anxious about the number of emails I had or the calls and texts that I missed, but no one had noticed. As I kept taking breaks over the coming weeks, I experienced feelings of joy and happiness during the day to be with my kids, which enabled me to unplug and recharge. Occasionally, I would take 30 to 45 minutes to go for a run or a cycling class. I realized how critical these breaks were to improve my overall energy, and I am now more productive than ever. Now my confidence is stronger, my mental health is healing, and my attitude at work is more positive. I went from being on the verge of quitting to accepting the daily tasks, but having some fun while working. Now, Bobby's account is a simplified version of the story because it wasn't just a behavioral change that allowed him to recover from burnout. It was largely a mindset shift. So just keep that in mind. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to cover the 3 mindsets that most often lead to burnout and specific hacks for each of them so you can get your mind straight and feel confident in yourself and what you have to offer. But before we dive in, I'm going to lay down a few ground rules. These are things you have to know. So this is not going to be easy. If you are here for like that quick fix, then you're in the wrong place. I'm going to teach you something that's going to take practice and time and dedication to your well-being. So if you're watching this webinar hoping that we're going to solve all your burnout problems in an hour and go on to live a blissful life, then this really isn't for you. If you're coming here with the intention to save your career-related well-being, no matter how hard it will be, then keep listening. What I'm going to teach you does require work. It requires self-discipline and effort. Most importantly, it requires being honest with yourself and committed to change to make this work for you. Now, to truly benefit from this webinar, please remove all distractions. You know, there was a study done by the University of Sussex in the UK that compared the amount of time people spent multitasking on several devices to MRI scans of their brains. They found that high multitaskers had less brain density in the cognitive region responsible for empathy and emotional control. I'm telling you this because A, high achievers are notorious multitaskers. B, empathy and emotional control are key reasons you're listening to this webinar. And C, I want you operating on as high a level as possible and not losing any more brain matter. So turn off your phone, turn off Facebook or TikTok, find a quiet space where you can be fully present for this webinar. This is powerful and I don't want you to miss a thing. I want you to get the greatest results throughout the next hour. Now, my clients that follow through and do the work go on to feel happy and have successful careers that last. They achieve extraordinary results using what I've taught them. But I want you to remember that these high achievers were committed to their well-being and career. They learned what they needed to learn, took action to get the results that they wanted. And your success is up to your own initiative. So be present. And I want you to remember that you're here to solve your burnout crisis, attain fulfillment from your work, and transform your life. So I want to answer a couple of questions here just before we get started. All right. So does this sound like you? You are so ambitious that you pursue your goals while neglecting your health and personal life. Motivation is not a problem for you, but when you don't achieve your goals, you are overcome with guilt. If you prioritize achievement over all else, you are overly engaged. Number 2, the engaged exhausted, is where you are highly engaged in your work, but your energy is running low. You just aren't getting the acknowledgement you deserve from all your efforts, and you lack control over your work. You find it increasingly difficult to perform your regular job duties. And when that happens, you feel bad about yourself for neglecting your responsibility. Now, if this sounds like you, as I mentioned, you are engaged, exhausted. And while overly engaged really corresponds with levels 1 and 2 of that burnout pyramid, engaged, exhausted, you could say corresponds with that level 3. And finally, you feel detached from your work, bored as a result of monotonous and repetitive tasks and the lack of opportunity for growth. You feel guilty about feeling unfulfilled while simultaneously wanting something to change. So if this sounds like you are disengaged. Now, as real as these scenarios are, I want you to know that they are not the real problems. I can tell you right now that even though you may be faced with these issues every day, they are the symptoms and not the cause. The cause of these problems is that you're treating your job like it's the only thing that matters and forgetting what's truly important in life. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, engagement is really something that you have to think about in your job. And so this palliative nurse collected the regrets of her dying patients. Here are a couple of the things that we can learn about life not fully lived. So one of her patients said, "I wish I hadn't worked so hard." Now, it's standard 21st century America for us to really work a minimum of 40 hours a week and only get 2 weeks vacation a year. But if you're watching this webinar, you're not average. You likely fall into the high achievers camp, which means that you work upward of 50 hours per week, if not more. High achievers are often those who fail to take their vacation days. It's no wonder high achievers burn out. They have so much to prove to themselves and others, and the work feels like it is never done. So when you are on your deathbed and you look back at your life, will you think you focus on the wrong things? Did you pass up on opportunities because you were too busy? Did you avoid taking the easy road, even part of the time because you had something to prove? Did you want to feel accomplished, but never felt like you had done enough? It's really time for you to rethink this paradigm so you don't end up with regrets. How can you work less, relax more, and enjoy the lifestyle you are working so hard to build? The other quote was that, "I wish I had let someone or I had let myself be happier." So as you get caught up in that rat race, you often forget to slow down and enjoy the journey. You might seek happiness in the form of accumulating material possessions, but find this unsatisfying. So why not pursue more happiness? For many, it boils down to the belief, "I don't deserve it." Maybe you believe that you're not worthy, that you are bad, or are even just unaware of your true value by not realizing when you aren't doing well. Author Mel Robbins wrote a book about the latter in the hopes of getting us to wake up to the truth and push the boundaries to reach our true potential. And Stop Saying You're Fine, Robbins outlines how we're often our own worst enemy. We get comfortable in our old ways even when they keep us miserable. We fear change, so we convince ourselves that everything is quote unquote fine. So how can you push the envelope and fill your life with greater joy? If you could have the kind of life you only dreamt of, what would be different? Maybe take this opportunity to write something in the chat. Surely you wouldn't be working as hard as you are. You would not be as lonely as you feel, and you would enjoy the comforts of your life more. So why not turn that dream into a reality? With the right mindset, you can. And I'm going to show you how to make these mental shifts in this webinar. And once you do so, you're going to replace the exhaustion, anxiety, the misery for the kind of relationship with your career that you dreamt of when you started on this path. Now, I know that these sound like grandiose promises, but I assure you, by the end of this webinar, you will get what you came for. And so that brings me to telling you a little bit about myself. Because you might be wondering by now, who is this lady who's been talking to me for the last 15 minutes? After all, you deserve to know me a bit better before I start offering you solutions, right? Well, I wanted to start by sharing with you that what I'm really like outside of work. So for me, lifestyle has always been number one. I've made a lot of important decisions with lifestyle in mind, like where I go to school, or how long I commute to work. Obviously pre-COVID. Now, thankfully, I'm working from home. And as much as that might sound like an easy thing to do, prioritizing that value of lifestyle, I've had to make sacrifices to maybe studying at a better university or working at a job where I might make more money. Those kinds of sacrifices are not what the typical high achiever does, but it's really a value-driven life for me, for sure. So here you can see who the most important people are in my life. And my goal is to work in a profession where I have maximal joy and spend the rest of my time with my husband and 2 kids. So I'm Dr. Sharon Grossman, and today I am a success coach, the author of the international best-selling book, The 7E Solution to Burnout, and an international speaker. But I started out as a trained psychologist. I began my career working for a nonprofit. I moved my way up the ladder, but I didn't want to go into management because I loved client work too much. So when I reached a ceiling within the organization, I began looking for my next move. Before long, I realized that the only option that suited me was going into private practice. While I was really excited about that opportunity for being my own boss, I was also concerned about burnout. I had heard so much about other psychologists who had gone into private practice and burned out. I didn't want that to happen to me. There was just too much on the line. I needed this to work. I didn't want to face the possibility of going back to work for someone else. I knew that I would not be as fulfilled, and that put me on a mission. I was going to do it smarter. To ensure that I wouldn't burn out, I created a schedule that included breaks, healthy lunches, exercising midday. I kept my office hours reasonable, not working early mornings, nights, or weekends. My excitement about having a private practice kept me feeling positive about my career for a while. But over time, I noticed that even with my mission to do it smarter, I'd fallen into the grind. I ended up doing the bare minimum. I was having session after session with clients and stopped feeling very engaged. Although I was paying attention during the sessions and really cared about my clients, I'd stopped doing anything above and beyond. And this, of course, scared me because there it was, the dreaded sign that things were falling apart, that I wasn't as happy at work as I thought I would be. And even with all my preparation, I was becoming a statistic. I was brought to this place of relative burnout because I'd lost touch with my purpose. And when I realized this, I sat down and asked myself, why am I doing this work? I connected to what drove my passion for wanting to help people live better lives because I knew I had what it takes to help them achieve happiness in their work. So I got reconnected to my purpose in my own career. And with this renewed sense of purpose, I started to prepare for my sessions. I came up with resources and exercise to challenge my clients and help them move beyond their stuck points and conflicts. I gave them ideas about what they can do in between sessions so they can continue to grow and learn. Having had that experience, I'm now enjoying my work and feeling energized, seeing my clients overcome their own obstacles and reach their potential. In the 2 decades that I've been in this field, I've worked with many high achievers of varied professional backgrounds and was able to see the common threads amongst them that lead to burnout. I made it my mission to expand their toolbox so they can become empowered and take control of their lives without being dependent on me for years to come. And because I love personal growth, this mission made my work feel like play. It was an excuse for me to take a deep dive into the latest evidence-based practices that address the mind-body connection. I created a library of tools to help my clients change their mindset, their relationships, their health, and ultimately live a meaningful life. I'm about to show you how navigating 3 distinct mindsets can lead to burnout or that lead to burnout can really save you and your career. So get out a pen and paper because we're going to go over some powerful distinctions over the next few minutes. Now, one of the most powerful principles that I've seen when it comes to burnout is the principle called reflection. It's a basic principle. So take your hand out and point at the screen with your index finger. Now imagine the screen was your boss, the demands of your job, or some other external circumstance that you are pointing at. Notice your hand. Whenever you point at someone or something else, you always have 3 fingers pointing back at you. Why is that important? Basically, what that means is whatever we put out into the world, it's a magnification of what goes on in our own lives. So if you want to shift your own world, if you want to shift the results that you're getting, you have to shift what's going on inside of you. And if you want to shift your burnout, you have to shift your inner world rather than focus on what lies outside of you. Let me explain a little more. So as you know, there are 2 types of people in the world. There are the types of people that say, how could you? They're the ones that point the fingers. They're the ones that blame. They're the ones that say, how could my boss do this to me? Or how could they expect me to do all this work? They're the ones that point out and blame the world for their problems. And then there are the other types of people who say, how can I? As in, how can I achieve the results that I want? How can I achieve my goals? How can I become the person whom I've set out to become? And it's the second type of person who takes responsibility for their lives that knows in order to create the change out there, they have to change what's in here. They are the ones that inevitably win. Now, I know for a moment you may be saying, wait a minute, I've been scammed before. I've been ripped off. I've had all of this happen to me. And it really is the world's fault as to why I'm in the situation that I'm in. I want you to consider for a moment that excuse is one of the biggest reasons why you're not where you want to be in your life and in your career. It's the finger out there which blinds us to the three fingers pointing back at us. Everything in our lives is a reflection of what's going on inside of us. If we want to change the results that we are getting, we have to change what is going on inside of us. Okay, which really then leads me to this first mindset that can easily lead to burnout, the dreaded imposter syndrome. You know, if you have imposter syndrome, if no matter what you do, you feel like a failure. You care about your career and accomplishments, so you get high or you set high expectations for yourself. Even when you are successful in your attempts, you attribute those successes to external factors, convincing yourself that it's just luck, not talent that got you there. You know how to kick butt at work, but what happens outside has not caught up with your insides. No matter how good you are at your job, you're always seeking out more training and certifications in the hope that this additional learning will lead you to finally feel confident, only to find out that you still don't know enough and have more and more to learn. Socially, you feel like you don't belong. You're afraid of looking stupid if you don't know the answer to a question, but refuse to ask for help for fear of what others might think. Because you fooled everyone around you, or that's what you tell yourself. And that's what leads you to feeling like a fraud. But this leaves you in a perpetual cycle of anxiety because you worry that tomorrow you will be found. You compare yourself to others who are more experienced or who appear to be more confident, and you feel inferior in comparison. To compensate for this insecurity, you obsess over details, have to do everything yourself, push yourself hard to prove that you're not an imposter. You might stay in the office later than anyone else or take on more projects than you can handle to prove your worth and gain other people's praise. The problem is your self-worth is dependent on achievement and on other people's evaluations and judgments, which ultimately you dread. When people praise your accomplishments, you worry about not being able to live up to those expectations. While you want to be seen in a positive light, you find it hard to accept compliments and tend to discount the importance of your accomplishments. Because you've adopted this go, go, go mentality, you become easily fatigued, your life lacks balance, and you are likely to burn out. On the other hand, when you aren't working, instead of resting, you become stressed out because you see downtime as wasteful. When your performance starts to suffer, you feel ashamed. The way you act as a result of the mental image you have of yourself and who you believe yourself to be determines how you act. In other words, if you tell yourself you're not knowledgeable enough, you will feel insecure around others and seek out more learning opportunities in an effort to catch up. If you tell yourself that you're not as good as others you work with, you'll feel less valuable than them and hold yourself back from sharing your point of view for fear of being judged. So how do we break out of this perpetual cycle? You know, if you're feeling like an imposter, you're going to push yourself to work harder all the time until you burn out. And when you do, you're going to feel ashamed of yourself as if you've done something wrong. So this is how we break out. First, notice that your behaviors stem from your thinking, but that thinking isn't necessarily based on the truth. That means that you need to change the mental image of yourself, the story you tell yourself about what you can and cannot do. In essence, you have to upgrade your perception of yourself rather than upgrade your skills at the office. I remember seeing an episode of the show ER many years ago, and in it, a patient played by Goldie Hawn came into the hospital for plastic surgery. She wanted to upgrade her image because she felt like she was too fat or too curvy. In fact, she seemed rather thin to the viewers and even the doctors. But her perception of herself was leading her time after time to have more external improvements done. Imagine being Goldie Hawn in that scene. Even though everyone around her had a positive view of her, she continued to believe others viewed her negatively and that she had to perfect her look to get their attention. When you experience imposter syndrome at work, it's no different. It's a subjective experience based on a flawed self-image and the projection of that image onto others around you. But what if you could feel confident in your ability without having to take more trainings or work yourself to the bone? Consider someone whom you look up to because they are both competent and confident. How must they see themselves? Do they acknowledge themselves or wait for others to acknowledge them? Do they value constructive criticism or shy away from it? Do they ask for help when they need it, or do they try to do everything themselves? By learning to think like non-imposters, you can upgrade the mental image you have of yourself. Remember, you need to allow your self-image to catch up to your external abilities. So visualize yourself as that confident worker, sharing your ideas at meetings, successfully accomplishing your goals, and being an inspiration to those around you. See yourself walking with an erect posture, feeling tall and mentally strong. When tasks come across your desk that used to stress you out, see yourself as thinking, I can do this. When you want to be successful, but worry about all the ways that you will fail, you're stuck in an inner mental conflict. When you practice seeing yourself in your mind's eye as the version of you that you want to be, you get to create yourself as you wish. Rather than working as hard as you do, you can set yourself up for success by using your mind to visualize how you want things to go. Once you delve into the work, it will be less effortful. Now, I'd like to share with you the story of my client, Rachel. She was a successful banker who was promoted to a new role within the bank, one where she had less experience than her peers. This led to her feeling like an imposter because she kept worrying that what others would think if they knew that she wasn't as knowledgeable as she was supposed to be in this expert role. Whenever she had some downtime at work, she worried about the perception that she wasn't working hard enough and felt guilty. Ring a bell? Well, Rachel would compare herself to others who were seemingly more confident and cringe. On a rational level, she knew that they had more experience than her. She also knew that she was offered the role with the full understanding that she would grow into it over time and that no one really expected her to know everything at first. But this didn't help her overcome her fear of being humiliated. So I worked with Rachel on increasing her mindfulness so she can catch herself whenever she had a negative prediction to lower her reactivity. I helped her identify the underlying issue to her imposter syndrome, and she began to investigate her unmet needs. Over time, as she wrote down her thoughts, she was able to pause more and found the experience empowering. She learned to distinguish between facts and thoughts and realized that so much of her inner dialogue was just thoughts her mind made up. Instead of believing those thoughts, she considered who she wanted to become and aligned her thoughts with this self-image. Instead of worrying ceaselessly about making a mistake, she adopted the principle, if I make a mistake, I make a mistake, which just gave her more breathing room. She was also able to focus on her strengths and steps toward growth. As a result of overcoming her anxiety, she started sharing her thoughts in meetings rather than holding back for fear of looking stupid. In essence, she gave herself permission to be herself. Now, maybe you don't have imposter syndrome, or even if you do, it's not the whole picture. What makes work most challenging for you is your outlook on life. So are you someone who sees the glass half empty, always anticipating bad things that might happen in the future? Do you worry about the possible failures no matter how well things are going? This way of thinking certainly comes from your primitive brain's intention to keep you safe. But does it? What I find often with my clients is that they just end up feeling more stressed, anxious, and drained as a result of their negative thinking. And that's because their thinking leads them to believe that they are incapable of changing their circumstances. So when they are faced with stressful events, they feel demoralized and eventually burn out. They lose motivation and feel less satisfied at work. You see, when your mind is focused on the negative, you tend to externalize your sense of control. As a failure, after experiencing a failure, you might say to yourself, it's all my fault. I did a terrible job. I can't do this. In essence, this line of thinking leaves you feeling deflated because you are internalizing the reasons for your failure, seeing the circumstances as both personal and fixed, so that you lose hope of being able to achieve the very thing you are trying to achieve. The good news is that even if you've been a pessimist your whole life, you can change your outlook. You can turn your perspective around to see the glass half full. The secret is to recognize your negative self-talk and do the exact opposite of what you've been doing. Instead of assuming you have no control, look for where you do have control. When you experience failure, and you will, it's important to remain hopeful about the possibility of success in the future. So find the roadblock and understand that it is external to you, that you can learn to overcome it next time around, and that it is temporary. Focus on tasks associated with your goals, on problem solving, decision making, and persevering. These are all within your control, and when you do so, you will feel happier at work. Whitney, a physician from San Francisco, said of our work together, years of negative thinking had gotten me into a technically good place in life where I was miserable, a scary place of burnout, fatigue, demoralization, and finally, depression, despite doing yoga, meditation, seeking help from friends, family, and other therapists. I was and continue to be happily shocked at the change in perspective that working with Dr. Sharon helped me to take, and by the impact that it has had on my life. Most significant is my awareness of negative thinking and how it is not helpful. So I'm able to let it go. And a shift towards self-compassion and trusting my own wisdom, as opposed to second-guessing myself and the world constantly. This shift has had a dramatic impact on my moment-to-moment contentedness, which has made me a more present, happy, and effective mother, doctor, mentor, friend, colleague, and wife. You know, sometimes people burn out even when they have the best of intentions. This can be seen with people who are perfectionists, who invest so much of themselves into their work, but suffer in the end. Let's dive in to understand what goes wrong here. So perhaps you are someone who becomes paralyzed by the fear that your work will fall short. You worry that others will judge you, so you keep working on your one task, trying to perfect it. The problem is that this prevents you from finishing your other tasks, and before you know it, there's a list of other tasks that you need to get to, and the stress keeps piling on. Perfectionism stems from the fear that you don't measure up, that whatever you do is not good enough. If your self-esteem is contingent on achievement, not only will your view of yourself suffer, but you're more likely to experience anxiety and depression. Sadly, all the investment of time and energy you put in does not lead to the outcome that you desire. Instead, it actually decreases your productivity because it leads to procrastination. When you want things to turn out perfectly, but you worry you'll disappoint others, you're going to struggle to take flight or even to complete tasks that you've already started. This avoidance prevents you from having to face the dreaded judgment you fear, but also ironically keeps you from achieving your best. If you are a perfectionist, you'll likely agree that you expect perfection of yourself and believe that others expect perfection of you as well. As a result, you create unrealistic expectations. You worry about making mistakes and being criticized and are filled with doubt about whether your work is good enough. And if you can relate to these characteristics, you might also find it hard to delegate tasks out because other people won't be able, in your mind, to do as good a job. And just like anything else, that relates to mindset, right? Perfectionism is something that can be unlearned. So if you want to be more productive, focus on doing a good job and getting the job done rather than doing it perfectly, then listen to this. I often tell my perfectionistic clients that they are too focused on quality over quantity. To dig yourself out of this, consider what else is on your plate. This requires you to zoom out and regain a sense of the big picture. This way, you'll be able to put this task in perspective to the larger goal and get back on track by reminding yourself to get it done so you can move on. The challenge is how to get things done in a quality way while still keeping up with the overall quantity of demands. Now, when you make a mistake, rather than seeing it as doom and gloom, think of it as a learning opportunity. Ask yourself, what can I take away from this situation that I can implement the next time around? When you accomplish a task, take time to celebrate your win before you run off to the next item on your list. Give yourself credit for all of your hard work. Ultimately, it comes down to self-compassion. Rather than holding yourself to these unrealistic standards, beating yourself up for not accomplishing what you set out to do, or faulting yourself for failures, it's about adopting a kinder self-talk that replaces judgments, that gives you permission to be human, make mistakes, and experience negative emotions when appropriate, without getting swallowed up by them. I'll never forget how one of my clients suffered as much as he did due to perfectionism. Kirk was a manager at a construction company. His tendency was to overanalyze everything. His negative energy at work left him feeling drained and overwhelmed. As a child, he was the sixth of 7 children in his family, so he learned to be self-reliant from a young age. Growing up, if he didn't know something, he would get put down. His family members would say, "How stupid can you be?" And from this, Kirk understood that his best isn't good enough. Over time, this led to perfectionistic tendencies as a way to prove himself, but it also led to him being inefficient. Kirk hated asking for help. He found it hard to admit that he didn't know something, but this over-reliance on himself led him to push himself until he ran out of steam. And despite the need to stop and refuel, he believed that taking time for himself meant that he was weak or selfish. When he got praised at work, he became fearful of not being able to sustain his success. He also never gave himself credit for his achievement. He didn't trust that something bad wouldn't happen when he got a reward, so he had to work harder to live up to it. He told himself, "I don't measure up." Perfectionism was his strategy to avoid being fired. So when we worked together, I really helped him to reprioritize what is important to him and create lifestyle changes. As much as he wanted to get praised for his work, what he wanted even more was to get his job done in 8 hours so he could be present for his kids and have some downtime. He began incorporating some daily habits that addressed his needs and worked to rewire his thinking. All right, so let's recap really quickly because we're just about out of time. We've covered so far these 3 mindsets that high achievers have that lead to burnout. The first was imposter syndrome, which really leads to a lowered sense of confidence, where no matter what you do, you just feel like a fraud and a failure. We covered a negative mindset that sees the glass half empty and anticipates bad things happening, which ultimately leads you to feeling stressed, anxious, and drained. And perfectionism, where you focus so intently on one aspect of your work that you neglect everything else, where you believe you don't measure up, where your self-esteem is contingent on your achievements, and where you sabotage yourself because despite your best intentions to produce quality work, you procrastinate. And finally, there was the power of reflection. Your experience in the world is a reflection of you. So are you managing your mind, or is your mind managing you? So by now, you have seen how Rachel, Whitney, and Kirk really struggled because of certain personality traits that led them to burnout and how they were able to turn their situations around. And so now what I want to share with you is what I consider the winning formula, which is creating a mental image of how you want to feel, improving your self-talk, working strategically while employing self-compassion, and investing in mentoring. Now, I know that we didn't have time to go into as much detail as I would have liked. And of course, I've spent years really researching the topic of burnout, writing my book, interviewing lots of experts in the field, and we just don't have to go into as much depth. So if you want to take the next step and you really want to challenge yourself, I've created this 7-day burnout challenge. So feel free to just sign up for that and take yourself on that, where every day you're going to get one video, one assignment that really helps you understand all the facets that allow you to not only change your mindset, but to really recover from burnout. So this is about really doing your life's work and doing it smarter, not harder. If you would like to get in touch, again, I'm Dr. Sharon Grossman. It's been a complete honor and pleasure being with you here today. If you want to touch base with me, you can go to bookachatwithsharon.com. You can also find out more about my work on my website at drsharongrossman.com and thepriminglab.com. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this was valuable, that you can take the next step to overcome your burnout.